We're talking about the YouTube purge, and now I'm joined by probably one of the most, if not the most prominent political commentator on YouTube right now. He's banned by Twitter. He remains on YouTube for the time being. We'll see how long that lasts. He is Carl Benjamin, better known as Sargon of Akkad. Carl, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good to have you on. Now, Carl, let's just set the table. Explain to the audience exactly how you were caught up in this YouTube purge yesterday.
Well, I was live streaming on one of my channels, and suddenly the live stream cut. I was knocked out of my Google accounts, and I was told that I was my account had been suspended. I don't know why, because on my accounts, on my YouTube channels, I didn't have any strikes or copyright strikes or community strikes. And I'm still waiting for YouTube to tell me what exactly this has all been about. So I'm just operating on theory at the moment.
And again, it's this whole Kafka-esque thing. You don't know what you've done wrong, so you can't even address it.
Yeah.
Do you think it's, like they've gone through your old videos and dug up something, or do you have any idea what might have caused this?
Well, I actually think this might have, excuse me, stemmed from a political spat about a year ago that I had with another YouTuber, where they leveled copyright strikes at an alternate account I had, and for some reason, over a year later, YouTube has decided to, I don't know, persecute me for some reason. I have no idea, like to just decide to suspend my actual Google account that my other YouTube accounts are attached to. And that's the best theory I have at the moment. But I mean, it happened a year ago. Why would they do it now? I mean, why would they do all of this right now? Because so many different accounts have been struck, given community guideline strikes, or just been suspended. And it's been part of, it seems that I've been caught up in this kind of stampede that YouTube have been taking part in and perpetrating. I don't know why they're doing any of it.
I mean, the volume does seem to have been turned up, especially since the Parkland shooting. Our own bureau chief, Jerome Corsi, by the way, last night, his channel is completely terminated. This is a guy who's been in the White House press briefing room, noted journalist. Yeah. He's gone. They're turning the volume up on everyone. As you're a liberal centrist, self-declared. And you made this point in the Big League Politics interview, actually, which I read yesterday. This purge hasn't, from what I've seen, really impacted the actual far right or the alt-right. The majority of the targets appear to be centrist conservatives and, what people call the new right. What can we deduce from that, do you think?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I mean, the ones I mean, there have been so many different accounts that have been struck. It's been difficult to keep up with the sheer volume. And honestly, there's a part of me that thinks that's probably not coincidental, but it's really hard to say, because it's exactly as you say. The far right accounts are being generally left alone, and even then, like, why go after the centrists? I just can't understand it. And the thing I think we have to bear in mind is the culture at Google, because this is something that I think they know that. I mean, everyone knows Silicon Valley is left-leaning, but I don't think they know just quite how left-leaning they are. If you go and James Damore's lawsuit against Google is actually public at the moment. Obviously. And so if you go through there, you can find some of the most ridiculous social justice warrior nonsense that's going on in the heart of Google that's being encouraged by the management. I mean, when Damore brought out his memo, evolutionary psychologists said, yes, this is exactly what we think. This is how the science, this is basically 90% accurate with the science. And then you had on the other side of it, Susan Wojcicki, who went to Fortune magazine and just openly declared that there were no biological differences between men and women. And it's like, okay, so on one side we have he's trained in biology, Damore, he was an engineer at Google, and he wrote a memo that was backed by science. And on the other side we have the CEO of Google, and she is, for all intents and purposes, a flat earther. So what do we do?
And there's a headline, actually. There's a new lawsuit, headline, YouTube hiring for some positions excluded white and Asian males. So they're facing another lawsuit over that. Of course, it came out in the James Damore revelations that he claimed they would literally like heckle and boo people for being white.
Yeah.
And these are the people that are now policing YouTube content. But in terms of, the alt-right not being targeted as much, in fact, we've seen people who debunk the alt-right, people who try to debunk ethno-nationalism, they get targeted for censorship. They get put behind censorship walls. They get, videos deleted. You were talking about in this interview, the greater threat to the left, it seems, is coming from the center and not the far right. So they don't really care about the far right. They use the far right just like the far right uses the far left, and they kind of play off each other, don't they? They're kind of mutually beneficial
Absolutely.
at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, I honestly think that the rise of the alt-right, and when I say that, that's a very generous term as well, because it's very difficult to find an alt-right YouTube account. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to find a YouTube account from the alt-right that's got more than 50,000 subscribers, and that sounds like a lot, but on YouTube, it's really not very many. But the rise of the alt-right, I think, is a direct response to the identity politics of the left, and I think that most people are already aware of that. That seems to be common knowledge at this point. But I think that the far left is well aware that the far right are never going to gain the sort of institutional power that the far left has at the moment, and the only genuine threat to that would be the more sort of classically liberal individualist centrists who are going to I mean, I genuinely think that that's a far more appealing message to the average person. You don't need to start contextualizing that within, well, look at power and privilege, and look how unfair this policeman acted towards this black guy in another country to you. You don't have to start doing all of that. You say, look, if we just treat people as individuals, and if we just refuse to discriminate based on race, gender, all of these arbitrary characteristics, then you will inevitably create a fair system, because that is what a fair system looks like. Instead of an unfair system where they now have to actually categorize people based on their race and gender, because to try and right some historical injustice or something that nobody involved has been responsible for. It's ridiculous, and I think that the world is becoming more and more aware of this as each day goes by, because of the phenomenal power that the left has at the moment. I mean, in the United States, wasn't it something like 55% of Trump supporters felt that they were under attack for being white? And I think that's a completely reasonable position to have, given that the way the left talks to them. And then exactly as you say as well at Google, there are examples in Damore's memo of them just booing white men in their meetings, and exactly say, like, they're now targeting Asian men as well, because I suppose Asians now have white privilege, which I guess if you look at the statistics, that's true, because they're doing very well. But then when you look at what they're actually doing, just their activities, okay, you can take any example and say, right, what did this guy do? He went through school, he got good qualifications, he went to university, he got good qualifications, then he went and applied for a job at Google, he got it because of his good qualifications, and then he ended up making lots of money as an engineer because he worked hard at his job. That's not privilege, that's earned, that's hard work, that's not some sort of arbitrary gift from the gods, that's something that someone has done. And they're going to find themselves in, and this really like all ties back to why Damore was persecuted in the first place, because Damore obviously had done basically the same thing, because I guess young men who are of a certain caliber have a tendency to work hard and do their best. But this all ties back to Damore, because the whole point of his memo was to say, look, it's not that women can't be in tech, and this is despite the misrepresentations you may have seen in the media, which are genuine misrepresentations. It's only a 10-page memo, anyone can read it. It's not that women can't be in tech. It's just that if you look at what happens in a free society, people tend to follow their natural inclinations. And if women's natural inclinations tends to lead them into other careers, you can see why Google's having a problem breaking that sort of 30% threshold to try and get women into their company. But for some reason, if women don't want to do it, you really can't do anything else other than change the nature of Google itself to try and cater towards women to get more women to join, which was what Damore's actual suggestion was. It was actually in the service of trying to get women into tech. But because they are so ideological and so deeply rooted in the social constructivist ideology that is intersectionality, they can't bring themselves to say that, because if they say that, that undermines absolutely everything about their worldview. If it isn't that someone's oppressing them, if it isn't that this is all about social biases and racism and sexism, then they really have to look at themselves and have a think and say, right, nothing I believe is true. And just being honest with yourself, if someone came up to you and showed you something that, they said, look at this, nothing you believe is true, you'd reject it out of hand anyway, wouldn't you? No one would want to accept that. And so I can understand why they're acting the way they're acting, but we've all got to be wary at this point, because I think they're getting worried, and I think they may be lashing out.
It does seem to be, a fork in the road right now. They are at war with reality. I mean, to put it simply, they're at war with the reality that a meritocracy exists in society, and that women, as you said, aren't naturally inclined, to apply for these tech jobs, as is reflected in their own gender percentage stats and race percentage stats in terms of their employees. But to expand this out, Carl, I can now barely respond to people on Twitter who aren't world famous. I can barely respond to people with YouTube videos as individuals who aren't world famous without them having some kind of mini breakdown and accusing me of organizing, a harassment campaign against them, simply because I refuted something idiotic that they said in the public arena. And I'm sure you've had examples of this personally before as well.
Yes.
Question is, do you think this whole contrived moral panic about harassment, which is what started the ball rolling on this YouTube purge last week, with CNN lobbying for YouTube to shut down our channel, do you think this whole contrived moral panic about harassment, speaks to this wider societal problem of even public figures now being so coddled, so oversensitive, that they automatically treat counter arguments and debate as cyberbullying and abuse? I think that's a wider problem here. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. So I think that there's a general distaste of public bigotry, that the public at large generally have an objection to it. They don't like seeing public figures being openly racist, openly sexist, and just openly dismissive. And really, I think it comes down to holding people in positions of power accountable. Because, I mean, Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson are the example of this, where she's on the attack the whole interview, desperately trying to misrepresent his position, desperately trying to close him into a box to say, look, everything that I believe is right and everything that you believe is wrong. And Peterson was just far too smart for her to be able to do that. She ended up looking like an idiot, not even looking like an idiot, but I mean, saying we should organize our societies along the lines of the lobster. Yeah, okay, she looked like an idiot, but like she looked like she was, like Peterson said, ideologically possessed. She wasn't listening to what he was saying. She was just fighting him. And then afterwards, instead of saying, okay, I may have made some mistakes, I may have said some silly things, I think I might reconsider my position on these things. Instead, she decided to say, oh, well, people are tweeting nasty things at me, therefore I don't need to change. Everything about Jordan Peterson's fans are wrong, and that's where I can lay the blame. And it's like, Kathy, nothing is wrong with Jordan Peterson's fans. I mean, and ultimately the hypocrisy of this, the number of times, like people, public figures have been chased off of Twitter because of a far left hate mob. I mean, just Google it. There are dozens and dozens of examples of celebrities like Stephen Fry, and you've got loads of them where they just get battered by the far left mob because they said something transphobic or whatever. And it's just like, you have to understand that this is just not a card you can play. You can't say, oh, I'm the victim, therefore everything I say is right and everything about me is good. No. You probably aren't the victim. You're coddled within a giant organization. You're just getting nasty words on Twitter, and it's because you were being nasty in the public space and because you're acting like an ass. Be nice to people if you don't want people to treat you badly. It's really that easy.
Well, we had another case of that yesterday. I mean, in addition to that, there was the Pamela Geller case where, this is a woman who gets serious, credible death threats from Islamic terrorists on a regular basis. The Daily Beast goes and exposes her daughters, who aren't even political. They're harassed, harangued. They have to delete their YouTube accounts. But that's completely fine. The Daily Beast journalist doing that is not going to get punished. No consequences for them. Jack Dorsey comes out the same day and says, oh, we need to have more civil conversations. Complete double standard. There was a fat pride activist last night who was arguing with a cancer charity. I think it was the UK's biggest cancer charity. She was arguing with a cancer charity after they tweeted that obesity causes cancer. And she going absolutely insane, saying this is fat shaming, this is horrible. People in the comments who called her out on her abject stupidity, they were then banned on Twitter for pointing out that obesity does indeed cause cancer. I mean, it's got to that level. I mean, let's expand it out, though. I mean, getting to the solution to all this. You know, I've noticed sometimes we talk about this censorship issue so much. People get jaded about it. We want to talk about our own issues. We want to push our narratives. We constantly have to come back to this censorship thing. A lot of people get bored of it. A lot of people say, oh, why don't you just move to another website? Why don't you just start a new YouTube channel? Carl, I don't understand. I don't think people understand how much effort, hard work, and persistence it takes to build up a YouTube audience. You know, this is a career.
Yeah.
This is a livelihood. And, you know, in many ways, your entire identity is wrapped up in that channel. So how does it feel? And I know this feeling all too well, to know that you could wake up one morning and find that all that has just been pulled out from underneath you and taken away. What's that feeling like? You must feel that on a regular basis, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm a father. I'm married. I have a family, and I'm a full-time YouTuber. And this is why I go out of my way to stay within the community guidelines. This is why my channels don't have any strikes, and I can live stream and whatnot on them. And so to be arbitrarily terminated is genuinely disturbing. I've actually managed to get back into my account now because some of the trusted flagger types are actually not bad folks, and they will help you as much as they can. And it turns out that what you can do is, if you have another Google account, I was able to make that a manager on my YouTube channels, which were left unaffected because there were no strikes on them. And so now I actually can resume my career. But yeah, it deeply disturbing, deeply disturbing. I mean, I appreciate that YouTube probably can't do this for YouTubers who have like 500 subscribers or something, because that's not a sustainable career. It's a different status, unfortunately. But I mean, when you have people whose lives are invested in creating content for their platform, you would think that YouTube would be slightly more concerned about the creators themselves rather than their competitors' perception of their creators, which is dominating YouTube's thoughts at this point. I mean, this started back in February 2017 when the Wall Street Journal attacked PewDiePie. Now, you can say, well, I mean, it's just an abstract thing, but it's really not. And there has been a distinct pattern of behavior from the Wall Street Journal. And it should come as no surprise that the Wall Street Journal has been suffering massive layoffs recently as well. I'm actually going to produce a video today that will categorize all of this information so people have access to it, because it's amazing. They attacked PewDiePie for his jokes, and they did. I mean, it was like anti-Semitic jokes. That makes Mel Brooks a Nazi. It's literally ridiculous to say that a comedian mocking Nazis is anti-Semitic. But okay. And then we've got on the 24th of March, they were still complaining that on quote unquote objectionable content, there were adverts. And then that led to the adpocalypse. So creators like me and really this PewDiePie as well, because this was unconnected to him, but they were just attacking YouTube as a platform, saying, well, look, you have an advert on a piece of media that we disapprove of, therefore YouTube as a whole is at fault. And that means that hundreds of thousands of independent content creators who had nothing to do with the very tiny slice of offensive content are now being financially punished by YouTube, or by the advertisers, for responding to an attack by the Wall Street Journal. And then on the 11th of November, you have the Wall Street Journal connecting YouTube to pedophilia. It's, oh my God, that's an even smaller slice of what's happening on YouTube. But yet again, the advertisers were called in. YouTube was called in front of the British Parliament on charges of hate speech, and they ended up hiring these 10,000 moderators. And when you look at the culture that Google and YouTube are swimming in, the far left, incredibly regressive culture, what kind of moderators are they hiring? And then we have the YouTube Purge, I think, as a direct result of that, where these 10,000 people decide, well, right-wing gun, all of this, conspiracy theory stuff. Right, okay, well, that's all verboten. And it's like, well, okay, but you've got to understand that YouTube it's a monolith. It's a huge competitor, like it's a hegemon. It controls the market when it comes to alternative media like this. It's so big, there just isn't a competitor around at the moment. Now, that's not to say that the free market won't create one. I really genuinely hope it does. And there are alternatives if people aren't aware. But unfortunately, you had VidMe was one that was around recently and had to shut down because they simply can't outcompete YouTube. Because at this point, anything that someone does, YouTube can just appropriate. And they've got the financial backing and the infrastructure to just be able to implement it within a few days. And they can now, they're at a point where they're so powerful that you've got to start trying to not attack YouTube, but like trying to get them to listen to you. And this is why there's a talk of a YouTuber union going around. There's a YouTuber called Yoey Sprague, I think his name is. He runs the Slingshot channel, and I think today he put up a video talking about how he wants to start unionizing content creators. And honestly, I think that it might be worth our time to do that, because we're just getting knocked around. I mean, they've cost everyone thousands of dollars. And that's, and it's small individual content creators. And then you go to the big guys like PewDiePie, they cost him millions of dollars. And all he did was tell jokes. So, yeah, I think something's got to change. I don't know why YouTube even listens to the mainstream media at this point, because if you look at all of their metrics, there have been so many layoffs, and they're all tailoring their content to be video focused, because YouTube is out competing the mainstream media, the old media. YouTube videos are becoming more and more accessible, more and more popular. And for some reason, YouTube keeps bending the knee to these people. If I were running YouTube, I would just tell them to get stuffed, because they can't actually do anything to YouTube. Other than the only thing they can do is attack their advertisers. And another thing that is interesting about this, the head of YouTube, Google Europe actually turned to the advertisers and said, look, if you are concerned that your adverts are appearing on quote unquote objectionable content, then you need to speak to your marketing departments, because we already have tools in place to stop you advertising on videos that you might find controversial. But if you're not doing it, then what you're telling us is that you actually don't care about that. What you care about is that there's a public scandal. And if there's a public scandal, you can just tell them to go away. No one is associating, Coca-Cola or Adidas with the Holocaust denial or something like that. Nobody's doing it, because everyone knows that on the videos that are being played, the adverts that pop up are served by an algorithm. No one thinks that these major corporations are, oh, right, we're going to target that precious neo-Nazi demographic to sell our product to, because that's our desired consumer. Nobody thinks that. It's all ridiculous. It's all just smoke and mirrors, really.
No, I'm surprised that it took them this long. If this is a purge, I mean, they kind of walked it back and said, oh, it was a mistake, but then continued to delete people's channels days after that. If it is the start of a purge, I'm surprised it took this long. It was August 1st last year when YouTube announced that they would hire people from the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center to police content. Okay, the ADL is an organization that thinks a cartoon frog is hate speech. I mean, so those are the people policing the content. Yep. They think the OK hand sign is a white supremacist form of hate speech. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with those kind of people policing content? The SPLC again.
On that one, I just want to correct you on that. Actually, the ADL didn't say that. That was actually left-wing mainstream journalists who had lied about what the ADL had said. The ADL had actually said it wasn't a form of hate speech, the OK symbol, but they said it was anyway, because for some reason, I guess they don't get
That's
called
correct.
on their
I
own.
remember that now.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Sorry,
the SPLC.
Specific. Oh yes.
The SPLC. Oh, yes. This is quite an interesting organization. This is a group.
These organizations are just a joke.
No, they listed Ayaan Hirsi Ali, an ex-Muslim reformist. They listed Majid Nawaz, a Muslim reformist, as anti-Muslim extremists, painting a target on their back for actual Islamic radicals to target them. This is who's policing YouTube. We wonder why this is happening. This is why it's happening. They publicly celebrated, the SPLC, Twitter banning, quote, right-wing accounts back in November 2016. They have nothing but contempt for free speech. So why should we be surprised? I mean, their entire business model is based around fanning the flames of hysteria over hate speech. So of course they're going to characterize edgy opinions, or merely in some cases conservative opinions, as hate speech. I mean, we saw this coming a long way off. I mean, I want to ask you the most basic question, though. The left says a private company refuses to bake a gay wedding cake according to their own policies, according to their own morals. They should be publicly shamed. They should be fined. They should be put out of business, which has happened in America. But Google and YouTube can censor and ban anyone it likes, Sargon, because it's just a private company. Now, is there some kind of contradiction here?
It's amazing how capitalist they become when it's convenient for them, because usually they're busy railing against capitalism. Normally they're as socialist as you can imagine until, oh, well, actually, it's in our interest to be very capitalist. Oh, Google's a private company. I mean, you can't force them to do that, even though we literally will do this to any company that gets in our way. I mean, look at the H&M coolest monkey in the jungle. I was going to say scandal, but it's really not a scandal. It's a nothing. It's a bunch of far left activists, racial activists, getting their panties in a bunch over something that was completely innocent, and they have no compunction doing this in at all, and they completely support it. You see how widely these things are shared on Twitter. They're completely in support of this, and yet they will be as hypocritical as you like as soon as you say, okay, well, if you can say we can create like public lobby groups against corporations, try and get them to do what we want, then why can't we do it? Oh, you can't do that. It's a free market. Oh, shut up. Shut up. I'm not even listening to you anymore. You're just such a hypocrite. I don't see why I would. You know.
No, I mean, there've been many people on the regressive left this week. That's good that you got your account back, by the way. But cheering,
Thanks.
applauding, popping champagne corks, celebrating the fact that we're being silenced. Like, like it's even possible at this point for their echo chambers to get any smaller. I mean, what message do you have for those who applaud monolithic corporations like Google censoring free speech? What do you have to say to those people who are all on Twitter celebrating still?
Yeah, I think they're remarkably short-sighted. If you can't argue for the rights of your opponents, then ultimately, when it comes to you having your rights threatened, there'll be no one to argue for you. I mean, I'm not. This isn't anything new or revolutionary. This is the basis of a liberal democracy and universal rights. Everyone should be protected. I mean, I don't like having to defend like the alt-right when they're being censored. I really don't. But I've had to do it consistently, because that is the principle I believe in. I think that everyone should have the right to free speech, regardless of how awful what you're saying is. And in fact, I actually think sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think it is better to have these unpopular and often vile opinions to be present so people can use them as an example of why we don't do these things. Why, these are a good springboard from which to argue against. But the regressive left just won't have that. And I think that honestly, it comes down to a kind of totalitarian mindset, because the number of them that I've seen who are just outright state they would censor someone if they could. I personally find that deeply immoral. And as soon as you create the power to censor, you can't be sure. Then you have to worry about maintaining control of that power. And then that becomes the focus of your life, because otherwise that's going to be used against you. And anyone who manages to usurp it from you, however they manage it, they're just going to turn it on you, and you will have absolutely no grounds on which to say, well, that's wrong for them to censor me, because it was right when you were doing it. It's so short-sighted.
But you're a Nazi, Sargon. I mean, come on. I mean, that's literally become that is almost a center-left position now. Anyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi. You see it more than ever. If you're a Nazi, how dare you have a right to an opinion? I mean, let's talk about solutions, though. Okay, this was mentioned in the Breitbart article, the Purge, which came out last night, big article. Ted Cruz, last month in a hearing, basically held YouTube's feet to the fire. He said if they don't comply with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, they're going to be in big trouble. That states that as a company, Google has to remain politically neutral. If they don't, they put themselves at legal risk of being responsible for the content posted on their websites. So they would be directly responsible, for example, death threats posted by an individual user. I mean, that's one way we can go. We can continue to pressure lawmakers on that. People have talked about an internet bill of rights. Aside from whining and complaining about it all the time until we're blue in the face, and I'm quite honestly bored of that at this point, but it does have some effect, right? They do walk it back when we make a big fuss out of it, but we continue having to do that. Aside from that, what are the solutions? What can we do to pressure YouTube to align its policies more in line with the First Amendment? What are some solutions that we can work towards?
Okay, so the problems that we face are that Google has a particular kind of culture, and it's very deeply embedded within Google, and it's very resistant to the ideas that we have. And it's not because there's anything wrong with our ideas. It's actually that they're just incompatible with the ideas that they have. They have a kind of top-down, centralized organizational view of the world, whereas the sort of classical liberal types have a kind of bottom-up, individualistic, and I wouldn't say chaotic. I think competitive is a better term. Competitive view of the world, where the people who are at the bottom and they organize their channels, they perform as they want. They want to be left alone to continue their careers as they want. But then when you find that coming into conflict with the top-down ideal that they're trying to impose on the world, which is political correctness and all of the sort of far left agenda, you can't help but find yourself at an impasse there. And so we can't persuade them to agree with us. We have to force their hand in the same way that the Wall Street Journal has done. Now, I would like to try and get them to say publicly and to maintain the stance that they won't police the political nature of the content on their platform. I think that YouTube's only mandate for policing their platform should be what is legal and what is illegal. Anything beyond that, they should have absolutely no opinion of, because that would be the, I mean, I'm just saying this as if I was running YouTube, because that would save me so many headaches. And the first time that something like this conspiracy video reaches #1 on the trending, and everyone's outraged. But if you look at David Hogg, he went on CNN and said, well, I actually don't mind that this happened because it made me famous. You know, it wasn't true. And everyone said, oh, look, it's not true. And so now he's got like 250,000 Twitter followers or something like that. And it didn't hurt him at all, but it did hurt YouTube content creators, like we're seeing now with this purge. They cracked down, they started censoring, they started, again, bad precedents. So what I think we need to do is try and explain somehow to YouTube, say, look, just don't accept it when they say you must do something. And after the like 2 or 3 times of this happening and YouTube saying, look, we don't have a political editorial policy, we're not here to police fake news. That's actually the public's job. And it is the public's job to police fake news. That's the thing. The last thing you want, because I've heard rumors of this coming down the pipeline, something that is effectively going to end up being a social media ministry of truth, where they are the ones deciding what is true and what is not. And when you have a company controlled by a person who doesn't believe gender is real, saying, look, I'm going to tell you what's true and what's not, that's beyond the pale, in my opinion. And that's a genuinely scary position to be in, because this person could quite well be in just an ideological bubble, and they'll say, well, anything outside of this bubble just isn't real, even if you have however much proof you need. So I think that YouTube should absolutely recuse itself from policing the political and factual nature of the content. That's for the public to do. And if you look at YouTube comment sections, if you look at upvoting and downvoting, it's a surprisingly effective mechanism for that. And the nature of the sort of public dialogue that goes on, people will police what's true and what's not. There are fact-checking organizations. There's every reason in the world for anyone to produce a rebuttal to something that's been said that's not true. It keeps the conversation going. It gives the audience something interesting to watch. So the idea that this needs to be done from on high is, I think, a dangerous precedent and unnecessary, and creating a rod for their own back. I think if they were smart, they'd just do exactly as I recommended.
And as you mentioned earlier, there are some rational actors within YouTube. Let's hope that those cooler heads prevail, because not everybody within these corporations is, it's not all the inmates running the asylum, at least not at this point, until they hire 10,000 more people under the management of the SPLC or whoever. But there is some hope on that score. Going to wrap it up, but just in closing, you're banned on Twitter, obviously, a while ago. Tell people how they can find you on these other alt media platforms.
Yeah, you can't get me on Twitter because Jack Dorsey is part of the Silicon Valley far leftists, and I wasn't shy in letting him know that he was an idiot. But yeah, you can just search on any search engine for Sargon of Akkad, and my YouTube channel has usurped the historical figure. So when I reach the afterlife, if the historical Sargon is there, I'm so sorry. But you can just find my channel that way.
All right, and you've got combined over 1 million subscribers now. Thankfully, you have access so you can continue to do your job, do what keeps you alive, what puts food on the table, and we're happy to learn that. Sargon, we'll keep an eye on it, but thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please click the big red button to subscribe. It really helps me when you do that. And click the bell to allow notifications so you never miss a new video.